Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our business meeting today. This meeting is being recorded. The documents which will be discussed here today are available on the event calendar on our website, which is wmc.wa.gov. They are also available in the handouts section of this webinar. I'm Amelia Boyd, and I'm the program manager for the Medical Commission. Becca King and I are the organizers for this meeting. Panelists, please be sure to mute yourself if you are not speaking. Attendees are automatically muted. Please note that anything posted to the chat or question section is considered public record. We will take public comment at this meeting. Once we get to that item, the chair, Mr. Malden, will read a script and will then ask for public comment. If you would like to comment, please use the raise your hand feature or add your comments to the question section. Our time for public comment is limited, and each speaker is likely to only have about 2 minutes to speak. And with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Malden for his chair report.
Welcome everyone to the Medical Commission business meeting this 9th day of July 2021. Hope all of you are well and doing well. Let me start off with a few comments as soon as I find them. I'd first like to congratulate Drs. Domino and Trescott, who have finally been reappointed by the governor. So thank you to the governor and welcome to your second terms. I know Dr. Domino is not present, but hopefully Dr. Trescott's on the line. I'd also like to recognize and congratulate.
Yes, I am here. Thank you, John.
Okay, thanks, Claire. I'd also like to recognize and congratulate Melissa McEachorn. She retired June 30th. As you all know, she was the Director of Operations and Informatics. She served the state for 31 years, so she has a well-deserved retirement. I don't know if she's present today or not, but I'm not sure if all of you knew that she had retired. Staff had put on a very nice farewell party, or at least as nice a farewell party as you can do virtually, but was nicely done.
Her last day was June 30th, Chair Mull.
Thank you. I would also like to recognize Dr. Harlan Gallinger, our newest commission member. Are you present, Dr. Gallinger? Oh, you are there. I wondered if you would like to make a couple of comments about yourself, a little introductory statement, and whatever else you would like to add.
Sure. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to serve in this capacity, and it was very informative yesterday through Panel A's sessions, and I'm eager to learn and how I can be most effective. And a little bit about me. I live in Sammamish, Washington with my family of I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I practice emergency medicine in Tacoma through a contracted group with Multicare Health System, and have done that since I left fellowship in 2011.
All right, well, thank you and welcome, Dr. Gallinger. Look forward to working with you.
Welcome.
Yesterday, someone asked about panel switch and the status of what we were doing with switching panels. I had a conversation with Rick Glein a month or two ago, and it was decided that we would discontinue the panel switching. Everybody except for the newest commissioners have participated in the panel switch program. We had sent out an interim summary from attendees at that point in time. I think we got about 8, maybe 9 responses. Responses were all pretty much the same. Enjoyed the collegiality of switching panels, enjoyed hearing how others present cases. There was a general consensus that outcomes are pretty much the same in each of the panels. I'm not sure I recall any other specifics. Would anybody else like to share their thoughts about the panel switch now that it has come to an end? I can't see anyone, or everyone, I should say. If you have a comment, just unmute and speak up. Okay, everybody's happy with the panel switches ended, presumably. The last item I'd like to mention is the commissioner retreat. We've talked about this a little bit. We are, Alden and generated some agenda items. I added to that. We put it all together. Got input from the executive committee, forwarded it to Melanie. Melanie did some revisions to the agenda, or I should say refined the agenda, and assigned some staff members to facilitate certain sections of the agenda. We need to fill in a few other items, a few other discussion leaders. And as soon as that's done, we'll distribute the agenda to the entire commission. The thought is that we will have a live meeting, hopefully in December. December is a month that we do not have a commission meeting, so we thought that would be a pretty good month, and probably early to mid-month, so we don't interfere with the holidays. Nothing more to add to that, but look forward to receiving the agenda so that you have some time to put your thoughts together when we get together in December. I don't know at this point how we are going to meet in the future. We've had the preliminary discussions about a hybrid model. As you all know, the August meeting will be virtual. Our October educational conference will be virtual. And we really don't know yet what we will do in November. Some discussion about, again, a hybrid model so that you can attend if you like, or do something remote. And Melanie, you're going to talk about this later and I'm stealing your thunder, or do you want to talk about it now?
No, I wanted to talk about it now because Amelia has been working with the Capital Event Center in Tumwater, where we've always met, to book the dates for 2022. However, there are 2 dates that she cannot find a venue for. And so we would propose to have those 2 meetings be virtual. The first meeting is the January meeting of 2022, and the other meeting is the May meeting of 2022. So we would like to have those remain virtual, and then the rest of the ones in 2022, we could have in person at the Capital Event Center.
Okay. That's a nice to know agenda item. Moving on to the consent agenda. We have 2 items on the consent agenda as usual. First item is approval of the May 14th, 2021 business meeting minutes. Are there comments or additions needed for the minutes?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Diana. I think that was Scott. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand, I should
Aye.
say, sorry. Opposed, raise your hand, say nay. Hearing none, motion carried. Next item is approval of the July 9th, 2021 business meeting agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Favor say aye. Raise your hand. Opposed? Seeing none, motion carried. Old business. The committee reports are found on, committee work group reports are found on page 14. There's a list of the committees and work groups on page 16, identifying the respective members. Are there any additional comments that are other than what are contained on page 14 that come from committee members or chairs of those committees? Okay, we will move on to rulemaking activities. Amelia?
So I have nothing further to report besides what's in the policy committee agenda.
Any comments from commissioners with regard to what's in the packet? Okay, the next item is Mr. Farrell, Policy Development Manager, will provide an update on his paper on the effects of state medical board disciplinary orders on ABMS specialty board certification. I assume you're there somewhere, Mike.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. So one of the longstanding issues that the commission has run into is how do your orders affect a physician's practice? There's a number of collateral consequences that may result after the commission takes action. One of them is the potential loss of board certification. So about 3 years ago, I decided to research this issue, and I wrote a paper and presented the findings to the commission. The paper was published 2 summers ago in the Journal of Medical Regulation, and it was called The Effect of State Medical Board Action on ABMS Board Certification. Really snappy title. To summarize, the paper points out that the 24 specialty boards don't have consistent criteria for determining whether a medical board action will affect board certification. And this makes it hard for our commission and other boards to know whether its actions are going to result in the loss of board certification. Now, most of the time, you don't care, but sometimes you do because it can affect your ability to help the physician get rehabilitated. So the paper details how the specialty boards differ and proposes that they come up with a uniform process, that the ABMS come up with a uniform process and criteria for all the specialty boards. When I was drafting the paper for publication, I ran it by ABMS, and they admitted that their specialty boards are not consistent and that they want a consistent process and consistent criteria. But then they said that state medical board disciplinary orders are not consistent from state to state or even within a state. And that, frankly, was not surprising. Our orders are not, they're very different from the orders, say, coming out of Oregon. We have different laws, different processes, different tools. So the paper proposed that ABMS work with its specialty boards to come up with uniform criteria, and also that state medical boards get together and come up with uniform sanctions. Last December, ABMS contacted me and said, we've come up with a draft, we'd like you to review it. I wasn't the only one reviewing it. They said they were sending it to a number of stakeholders. I provided them with my thoughts. One of them is to get rid of the criteria that a diplomate has to have an unrestricted license. That was one of the inconsistencies. Every specialty board had a different definition of unrestricted. And I suggested that they look at each case on a case-by-case basis and provide discretion to the specialty board to determine whether certification will remain. I also suggested that I provided that feedback to them. They got back to me last month, and with a new draft, they incorporated some of my suggestions. They got rid of the criteria for an unrestricted license. They are going to look at it on a case-by-case basis. They told me this is a long process. This is still a draft. They said that they had always planned to do this, but they said that my paper was the impetus for beginning the project. And they said that the draft will become final probably in early 2022. So that's the update on the paper, and I would call that progress.
Sounds great. Anyone have questions of Mike with regard to the paper?
Mike, that's an incredibly important paper and incredibly important work that you've done here. This is a problem that we've had to deal with over time, and it has unintended consequences all the way up to and including losing privileges at hospitals for good doctors. So what you've done is amazing. Thank you so much for what you've done. It's really important work.
Yeah, I also want to say thank you, Michael. A couple things. One, do they fairly easily give certification back at the end of the restriction? And then secondly, I'm wondering if we should have a back and forth conversation with the boards on cases in the future on which we feel should be restricted and which shouldn't be. I mean, there are some that have to do with quality of care that a restriction is not bad, but some that it seems inappropriate. And then the other thing is that we've never had the ability to communicate back to the board that we think this person is ready to be practicing and their board certification is essential and we would like it to be returned. I don't know, it just seems like we should be communicating back and forth with ABMS.
Yeah, to answer your first question about is board certification readily returned, it is, but specialty boards are looking at the whole picture. So if the diplomate has, for example, engaged in sexual misconduct, that may result in a permanent loss of board certification, regardless of what the state medical board does. Their new criteria is violation of professional norms. So they're looking at, can the person practice safely and have they caused disrepute on the profession? So they look at cases similar to the way we look at it, the way our commission looks at it, but they're looking at a broader picture. So you in compliance, you often ask the respondent, did they lose board certification? Most of the time they'll say no. And sometimes when they lose it, they'll say, I got it back. So generally they do get it back. Regarding communicating with specialty boards, we've done that in the past, and many times they will not communicate with us. They don't want to be influenced by state medical boards. They want to be independent, just as we do. They have their own criteria, their own agenda, although certainly there's a lot of overlap between what you do and what the specialty boards do. I do have good communication with ABMS. So I think I can pose that question, Dr. Trescott, about can we have communication with at least ABMS on a particular case? And I'm not sure I addressed your third question.
I'm not sure I remember it, so that's probably good.
I also want to chime in and say, and I've said this in the past, we haven't really met, but I'm the chair of a committee that is sponsored by the Federation of State Medical Boards, where we are looking at board orders to try to make them more consistent across the nation, as well as to be able to see exactly what the issues were without having to read through the entire order and then come to the sentence unprofessional conduct and not know what that means. Was it sexual misconduct? Was it standard of care? So I am working with this work group at FSMB to try to get more consistency, and I'm hoping that they will raise this at the board attorney workshop that's in the fall sometime. And so Mike, I know that you are part of doing that, so I'm hoping that we can get some input from the board attorneys on that issue.
And I'll put that on the agenda.
Other comments or questions? Thank you, Mike. That's important work. Well done. The next item on the agenda are lists and labels. We have one request from Cassidy Seminars. Heather, do you have comments with regard to the request?
Sure, this is Heather. I did look at the request. They are requesting based on being an educational association. They do appear to offer educational opportunities, and I would recommend approval.
Entertain a motion to accept the request. Thank you, Terry. Do we have a second? Teresa, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. We'll move on to public comment. Hold on while I find my public comment script. We will now begin
While you look for it, while you look for it, John, I just wanted to say, in looking at the educational work that this group offers, there's some, I think, new work coming along in trauma post pandemic that they're doing, or they're educating about. There's some changes in the management of trauma. I know with EMDR, there's some evolution in that treatment for trauma, and they're focused on that. So they actually are bringing something, I think, of value educationally that's somewhat unique, and I'm glad we're going to accept their request.
Thank you, Claire. We will now begin the portion of the business meeting to take public comment. The purpose is to allow members of the public to directly address the commission on issues of public concern. Please refrain from providing comments on pending or open investigations or in disciplinary cases. We will not be answering questions or responding. Staff will be available after the meeting to answer your questions. Please understand that although the time period for comment during the business meeting is limited, the public can attend and provide comment at committee meetings. The public can also contact staff during normal business hours. We welcome written comments as well. Each commenter will have 2 minutes to speak. When you comment, please state your name and who you represent. Would anyone like to comment at this time?
We do have one hand raised. Dr.
Thank you,
Gundy, go
Amelia.
ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and the members of the commission. This is Chris Bundy, Executive Medical Director of the Washington Physicians Health Program. I just wanted to quickly circle back to and comment on the ABMS draft standards for continuing certification and underscore what an accomplishment this is for physicians who are experiencing conditions that lead to impairment. Many of these cases are actually impairment cases, and both the Washington Physicians Health Program and the Federation of State Physician Health Programs was also heavily involved in this work. But it was really Mr. Farrell's draft comments that were most salient and most critical that we were able to also endorse as an organization. So I just wanted to highlight that and say, from the perspective of the impaired physician, this is a giant leap forward.
Thank you, Dr. Bundy. Amelia, are there other potential participants?
No, there are not.
This concludes the public comment portion of the meeting. Next agenda item is the policy committee report. Dr. Domino is not available today. She had to work. So it's up to me. So please bear with me while I go through this. First item on the agenda was telemedicine rulemaking, a request to rescind CR 101. Apparently we are expecting new legislation that will impact telemedicine rulemaking. And so the request is to rescind. And Micah had asked if you have additional comments with regard to the status of telemedicine rulemaking.
Sure. So as you know, we've, and according to the memo that's included in the packet, we've been doing telemedicine rulemaking for a little over a year now. We've had in the last legislative session a couple of telemedicine bills. We expect more to come in the next legislative session. And finally, there's an effort at the Uniform Laws Commission to draft a uniform law for telemedicine that addresses both practice and insurance coverage. So that, if passed, that would significantly impact whatever you adopted. So as opposed to putting on hold the telemedicine rules effort for up to 24 months, we're asking that you rescind the telemedicine authorization, the telemedicine rules authorization. And once the dust settles on the statutory changes, then we would take a look and see what needed to be addressed in the rules.
Policy committee voted to accept the request. And I believe procedurally, we just need to have a vote. Correct me if I'm wrong. All in favor, say aye. Raise your hand. Opposed? Seeing none, the item passes. Next item on the policy committee agenda was stem cell rulemaking. Apparently there was legislation developed that fairly well eliminated the need for stem cell rulemaking, but we do need to adopt a policy or a guideline with regard to stem cell rulemaking. Amelia, do you have additional comments?
No, that was very good. Thank you.
Okay. Again, the policy committee voted to rescind CR 101 and create a policy or guideline. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. The next item is opioid prescribing patient exclusions. And again, this is a request to initiate CR 102 process. And Amelia, I'm not sure I'm familiar enough to make comments on this, so I will rely on you to bring us up to date.
Sure. So we did rulemaking for opioid prescribing back in 2017, and during that process and after, we had requests to add some different types of patients to our exclusions. And so we met and had a workshop and discussed this draft language. We've added nursing home patients, long-term acute care patients, patients in residential treatment facilities, and then we also added patients in residential habilitation centers. And we did that in both the MD and the PA chapter. And our ask here today is to initiate the next step in the rulemaking process, which is the 102.
Policy committee voted to request to initiate the CR 102 process. All in favor, say aye. Raise your hand. Opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. The next item is the procedure. It's not a lot of order, but it's still what we discussed next. Procedure for processing complaints of sexual misconduct through Sexual Misconduct Analysis Review Team, which the acronym is SMART. This was a periodic review, and Mike had made some possible revisions to the policy. After some considerable discussion, it was thought that some of the language with regard to a gender identification needed to have a more contemporary thought process behind the language. So the thought is that this item would be postponed until next meeting, and that if anybody has suggestions with regard to more contemporary language, please contact Mike Farrell. I think there are a number of folks who have volunteered to work with Mike and develop additional language. Are there any questions with regard to the procedure? For those of you who are new, SMART training is something we developed It's a procedure, a process for managing behavioral issues that physicians get into. It's into borderline sexual misconduct. And I think, Melanie, correct me if I'm wrong, you're scheduling some additional SMART training sometime in the near future for new members?
Yes, we're trying to do it in conjunction with the retreat. The gentleman who does the training can only be here on the 8th or 9th of December. So those, I think there are 5 commissioners who have not been SMART trained if they desire to be so. One of those days is the only time he has in 2021 to do it. So I believe Jimmy sent out a doodle poll, or perhaps Amelia, to get your input for those that need SMART training on which day would work best. If we can't do it those 2 days, then I'm not sure when in the future we'll be able to have him join us. He's fairly booked up.
But he does a great job. It's very very important stuff, and it's just well done. Claire, you have a question or comment?
Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
This arena around language and gender and sexuality is really evolving. And I think that we as a group need to evolve with it. And I'm a little worried about our new rather aggressive redacting of our cases. If we really redact everything that has to do with gender, we're not going to very easily evolve with the rest of the population. And we may very well miss some of the nuances around gender that we're already seeing in cases where people are not happy with the pronouns being used in the exam room. So I think that we need to, I don't know exactly a solution to this, but I do think we need to look at our redacting, look at how it impacts our getting these reports and our evaluating them. We need to have some eye to the gender issues and the pronouns as part of evaluating cases.
To the best of my knowledge, Dr. Trescott, we don't redact pronouns or gender. We redact names, places, where they went to school, addresses, but as far as I understand it, and I can check on this, we don't redact pronouns or gender.
I think that our write-up actually says to avoid it on our paper about how we write up a case.
Okay,
So,
I don't know. I'm talking about complaints, those things that you get at CMT. So I will have to check with Frida on that, and I will check with Rick on the assessments.
I think, again, the gender issues and the pronoun issues are part of some cases, and we do need to look at how redacting has an impact on that.
Thank you, Claire. Dr. Small, you have a comment?
Yes, I do. And this really dovetails on what Claire was saying. And I'm actually, in my day job, very involved in this. So looking at what's up on the board right now, number 5, and the hearing panel will include, and the last item there is at least one commissioner who identifies as female. So I just point out that although, by the way, the large majority of victims of sexual misconduct are female, some are male, and going back to what Claire was saying, some are going to identify their gender in other ways, be non-binary, gender fluid, whatever. So I think that particular phrase needs to be looked at and modified. So I just wanted to make that comment. Not all victims are going to be female.
That was the paragraph that raised a number of questions during the policy committee yesterday. So I would encourage you, Bob, if you've got been working on this sort of thing and have some knowledge that you may want to contact Mike with some of your thoughts.
Glad to.
Thank you. The issue that we are trying to mitigate here that has been historically the problem is that the panels are made up all of males and the victims are usually female. And this happened where we had a hearing of all male commissioners. The victims were all females and none of them were found to be credible. So it was important for us as a commission to include on the team of RCMs that review a case, one person who is a public member and one person who identifies as female. That doesn't mean both have to be female, but there has to be at least one. There has to be a mix of male, female on the RCM team. I don't know how you word that, but that's what the outcome needs to be.
Yeah, and I think that works for 99% of cases, but the way this is right now, it would be possible to have an all-female panel and a male victim who's the identified victim. So I think we just need to account for those rare possibilities.
Right, and this original version included one RCM who was identified as male and one who identified as female, and one of those two was a public member. So the process was to include both, not just one side of the story.
Okay.
Tim, you had your hand up?
Sorry. Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on anybody there. I mean, as Bob just pointed out, this is a rapidly evolving area within medicine as far as gender and sex and the difference between the two. I mean, there are many complexities. I don't think it's so complex that we can't deal with it, but I do think that we need to, there are many people with great expertise in these areas who I think can help us with this. And I don't think we should just kind of guess at it and say, well, I mean, I don't think we should guess at it. I think we should identify and consult with people who have expertise in this rapidly emerging area, because that way we'll get it right the first time and we won't have to keep revisiting this over and over again.
Dr. Curry?
I just comment that, yeah, I've been working in this field for over 20 years. It's a little easier if you just say that all genders are represented and don't use male and female because that is unclear. Just refer to gender and all genders are represented. And that way on the panel, you should get the variety.
Thank you. Are there other comments? And again, I can't see everyone, so if you have a comment, just speak up.
Dr. Curry, I greatly appreciate what you just said. I think it reflects your experience in this. I would say that, I mean, gender is not just male and female. I mean, gender is complex because it's fluid, and there are people who identify themselves in a way that's almost not attributable to male or female. And so I think that's part of the complexity. Thank you.
Yes, a binary identity makes it difficult.
Other comments? Okay, the next informational item we have is the procedure for interactive and transparent development of evidence-based policies and guidelines. This is essentially the procedure for development of policies at the policy committee. It was decided that this document needed to be upgraded substantially, and the committee had voted to rescind this particular procedure and start all over again, setting up another work group to develop a new administrative procedure. Mike, do you have other comments about that?
I think you covered it. I just want to make sure I have the committee, the volunteers, Dr. Roberts, Dr. Domino, and if I heard earlier correctly, Ms. Blake has agreed to help us out.
correct?
Everyone else is welcome to join as well. If you want to join, please contact Mike. The last item we talked about was the Cures Act. And one of the new provisions, or I should say provision, is that the EMR belongs to the patient, and that the EMR should go to the patient without delay. Dr. Domino gave an example during our discussion yesterday. She mentioned, and I don't know if it was in her hospital or somewhere else, but it was an example she gave where the patient was undergoing surgery, and as the surgical procedure was moving forward, I think it was the nurse, the anesthetist, was making notes in the patient's chart, and the husband of the patient noticed that the anesthetist was administering anesthesia in the patient's foot and didn't understand that, called the operating room demanding to talk with those in the operating room, and was apparently upset because he didn't know what was going on, and there was no discussion beforehand that anesthesia would be administered through the patient's foot. So that's an extreme example of the immediate immediate contact with the patient with regard to patient care. It's probably an extreme example, but still, nonetheless, it emphasizes the point that the EMR is the patient's record and it goes directly to the patient as soon as possible. It just made me think after our meeting yesterday. I can remember back in the 70s, early 80s, when there was a change to the informed consent rule through the state Supreme Court, and out consulting with docs, telling them or explaining to them what you need to do now with the informed consent process, and having docs say to me, I can't tell a patient that we won't have any more surgeries, we won't have any more care. That's just impossible. Then it reminded me also year around 2000 when I was working with open communications with patients about patient errors. And again, docs saying, I would never tell a patient I made a mistake, and yet today that's pretty well accepted. So this takes the information of the patient one step farther, where the patient may know all about what you're doing before you know they know. So the thought is that the commission would collaborate with the WSMA to develop some guidelines for licensees to introduce this topic and give them some context of what may happen and what needs to occur in the future. Any questions or comments about that process, Yangling? You're muted. Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm not sure what you said. Any other comments?
I have a comment.
Okay.
Most of the EMRs have disclaimers in them now. So there is a big red box that shows up that says you're getting this information 2 to 3 days before your doctor might see it. I will say from experience in the last few months, nobody reads that. So, and talking to physicians in my organization, everybody is a little freaked out about this. So I think it's important we address it. It might be a good newsletter topic. One thing that's happening is the volume of work has increased for everybody, because we're getting about between 20 and 50% more phone calls and emails from patients the minute they get their results. They're calling in the office or they're emailing us through their secure messaging, asking for explanations. So there was a very large leap in patient communications and sort of time, sort of after hours work trying to address everybody's concerns, because people have a chance, they read their results and then they Google it and they spin out, right? So I think this is really important to address. I know from, again, talking to lots of physicians around my organization, people are ready to quit over this. So I know what you're referring to, Mr. Malden, about the, the apology laws and the informed consent process and everything, and it kind of settled down after physicians' initial sort of concerns about it. But the hullabaloo that's happening now, whereas in the past that was on the physician side, honestly, it's coming from the patients, and it's impacting people's daily work enormously. So thank you for bringing it up and for addressing it.
I think it's going to be a significant issue that organizations are going to need to deal with. May cause a need to hire additional staff to address all of these issues and questions that patients have more quickly than previously. So we did discuss a newsletter item on this, as well as the collaboration with WSMA and developing some additional information and maybe even a guideline, informational guideline to licensees. Dr. Gallinger, you have a comment?
Thank you. It's creating a lot of problems for us in our ER because the patients are getting the results before we are getting back into the room to go over their results for both their lab results and their radiology results. And when it just gives a little red tick mark by, oh, this is abnormal, and it could be their small subsegment part of their CBC. So it's creating a lot of problems in our workflow, and it's creating a lot of patient dissatisfaction. And the irony is that if we're judged, one of the 5 things we're judged on in Press Ganey is patient was kept up to date and informed on their treatment. And so they're feeling very frustrated that they're not being kept up to date. They're getting these results in real time. If I have 12 patients, I can't get into the room to let them know the results before they're getting back to them. And so you're walking back into the room and you're essentially getting jumped on by the patient because they're like, well, why didn't you tell me about this? So I think that I would love, beyond just doing a update and newsletter part, I think that we should consider having some commentary go back to whoever made this rulemaking at the federal level and say it's impacting our providers in this way. And certainly if it's going to be a workforce issue with providers wanting to quit over it, that's problematic and should be escalated so they know the impact. But I certainly can say in the emergency department with Epic, it's been very problematic.
That's a good thought. Maybe something we can discuss at executive committee and include Mike, see if Mike can develop something. Dr. Murphy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I would echo that. And on the east side of the mountains, I work in the smallest emergency department I've ever worked in, where our annual volume was typically 11,000 patients a year. So in the first 6 months of 2021, we have seen 9,000 patients. So to echo what Dr. Gallinger said, yeah, we can barely get back into the room to say, I have your test results and we need to talk, because the test results might not just be the sodium is 1 point below the lower limit of normal. It might be you have a tumor in your esophagus and that's why it's hard to swallow. It might be that bloating that you have is a pancreatic tumor with spread everywhere and you have ascites. We're seeing a lot more cancers, a lot more bad diagnoses because of the delay in healthcare for 12 to 18 months, and it's stressing everybody out. And yes, there's people in my department who are talking about terminating their careers.
That's a significant consequence. Doctor, you have a telephone to your ear. I assume you're connected now?
Yeah, I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Can.
Okay, thank you. I just want to comment on a little bit, elaborate on what you said about informed consent. I think a lot of time in reality, people tend to misunderstand that informed consent is just a matter of filling out the paper and the form. And so in a short period of time, certainly it's very difficult to cover even important risk and benefit. But I think informed consent is really a process, and it is enable both sides, physicians or providers and patients, family members, to go over the facts, the evidence-based, the recommendation, the treatment options, risk of, benefit and alternative, so they can come up with joint decisions that match, fit the patient's perspective and their goals. So it really we should emphasize, whatever we do, commission should emphasize its decision. And the best approach is probably the shared decision making. The state has various shared decision making tools, but only very specific to certain treatment options and disease, not for everything. But I think we should really think about it. I really would like to suggest the commission develop a policy how to guide the practitioners to better understand or better use the informed consent, not just from the legal perspective, but for improve the care and to help patients, family members to develop the best treatment options for them.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. Thank you. Claire, did you have a comment?
No.
Other, Diana?
I want to make one follow-up comment, sorry, just to get back to the Cures Act. It just dawns on me that we need to educate physicians, but actually like a public education campaign, like those old PSA announcements, feel like we need to educate the public maybe about this, and maybe WSMA or somebody can step in, or the Department of Health, because the cat's out of the bag. We're not going back, but it is true that, when pathology releases all their batch results at midnight on Saturday, and 5 of your patients have new cancer diagnoses, Monday morning is just insane, right? Because everybody's frantic. So I think this requires a public education approach as well.
I think that's a great idea. I think if you have ideas about that and comments back to the feds on the policy, please give those to Melanie. Melanie and a work group will be working with WSMA to develop some thoughts about this. So please offer those comments. Dr. Chung, I can barely see your hand raised out of the corner here, so I'm assuming you have a comment.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't mean to drag this out any further, but I think what this really does is it really should force us to consider holistically what, how records should be documented in the first place. I mean, I think there's a real evolution in how medical records are being documented and collected. In the old days, doctors can scribble whatever they wanted as long as they can read it, because medical records were really meant for us to keep track of our patients. The idea that the medical record should be immediately available to patients, I think, changes the purpose of medical records, and that it needs to be documented in a way that's, owner friendly, that the ones who are intended to own the record should be able to interpret it themselves without having to panic or, having to have a medical degree. So I think the efforts that we make in terms of public education or educating ourselves have to include really rethinking of how records should be documented in the first place, so that we don't run into an issue where patients may panic because they get it first. I think the language has to be changed. The way we document it has to be changed. It has to be changed in a way that actually means something and makes sense to those who are actually reading it.
It's a very tough issue. Are there other comments? Again, I can't see. Dr. Small?
So John, just before, not about the Cures Act, but before we leave policy, I do have two questions. Number one, just going back to telemedicine, since we have voted to rescind the CR 101, and I just need some clarification on this because I get different answers over time. Is there an RCW or a WAC that states that physicians or PAs in other states who are not, physicians and PAs in other states who are conducting telemedicine with patients in Washington state must have a Washington state license? Mike, maybe you could address that.
Either
Sure.
Mike or Micah, yeah, or both.
Quickly, there is no statute or WAC that specifically addresses that issue. There's, of course, statute that says to practice medicine in our state, you have to have a license. And there's a longstanding principle that the location of the patient is where the practice of medicine begins, or occurs rather. So it's a general legal consensus that to provide telemedicine services from out of state, you need to be licensed where the patient is.
John, did you have a comment about that also?
No, I don't. I don't know if Micah does.
The only thing I would say is I agree with Mike. There's always an assumption that you have to have a license to treat a Washington patient. That's actually specifically stated in 1871B, the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact Statute. But I would remind you that you do have a policy that you've had in place since 2018, which allows in certain cases for a practitioner out of state to treat a patient that is pre-existing. That's the continuity of care policy, and so it was determined by the commission at that time, and I think it's been reaffirmed numerous times, that if it's an established relationship already and there's a reason that the patient happens to be in Washington, whether it be for schooling or travel, work, and it's infrequent episodic, and usually border issues. This really came up with people who live in Vancouver and have their doctor in Portland. And then I'm sure there's a Spokane Coeur d'Alene issue as well. That's really where this came into play. And the question was, is it practicing medicine or telemedicine? If I call for a consult with my doctor triages something and calls in a prescription and I'm in Vancouver, yes, technically it probably is, but common sense says we're not going to say, patient with this doctor you've had for 10 years, go get another doctor because you're in Vancouver right now. If the normal process is to go see the doctor, but they happen to have a phone call, that's really has not been a historic concern.
The other thing, Dr. Small, that I want to bring up is this year during the legislative session, the Medical Practice Act was changed to allow consultations from out-of-state doctors who are not licensed to practice in Washington with licensed physicians in Washington state via telemedicine. And so the out-of-state doctor does not have to get a license to consult with an in-state physician.
Yeah, those are good reminders. So thank you all for that. And then let me just ask my second question, whoever would like to answer this, just what the status is of the CDTA rulemaking.
I can answer that. That is on hold right now, and we are doing some more stakeholdering.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Yu?
Yes, I just want to circle back around the patient records issues, and I really like the comments previously made about how to help make the records more accessible to patients. And I think right now, a lot of the facilities, healthcare system adapt open notes, and which I know is very good, options for improve records access for patients and for improving the communications. I would just want to put this out. I don't know whether there's any room for any policy issues. I don't know, but I think this is a great vehicle for, really to improve the care.
Thank you. Additional comments from anyone? Okay, well, that was a good, lively discussion. Thank you, everybody. It's the CARES Act is creating lots of issues for medicine. So hopefully we can move forward and get some results doing something, maybe something differently. I don't know, but something needs to be done for sure. Okay, let's move on to commission member reports. Does anybody have a comment, a question of any topic? Hearing none, we'll move on. Staff member reports are found on pages 59 to 66. Are there additional comments or additions since press time?
I have an additional comment that has come up recently. We kind of goes back to the consistency of orders that we were talking about just a couple of minutes ago. And it's regarding personal appearances. So those of you that have been on the commission quite a while may remember this, but in 2016, we had a retreat. It was up in Marriott at SeaTac. And maybe you remember that Jimmy Bush did that macro map of the process, and she went through that. And then during the day, the two panels, Panel A and Panel B members, went off into different areas, and they looked at a case, and they wanted to see how the other panel looked at the case, and they came up with the same conclusion. So Dr. Terry was the chair at the time, and during that retreat, after the discussion about the panels, a decision was made by a vote of the full commission at that retreat that every order or STID would include at least one personal appearance. That was a requirement. And so that became the policy and the practice of the commission because it was a vote by the members during that retreat, and I have notes to that effect. It's come up lately that several commissioners want to eliminate or exclude having a personal appearance. And right now, under this policy, individual commissioners don't have the discretion to exclude a personal appearance. And so we've just included those, at least one in every order. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't change that procedure and policy going forward. It would have to come back and have a full vote by the commission to add some exceptions to that rule. For example, I know that if we mirror an out-of-state action, having someone personally appear may be silly. But also with the introduction of virtual appearances, it isn't too much of an imposition for someone to come online for a chat with the panel. So you could do it either way, but right now the procedure and policy is there is at least one personal appearance required by every respondent. And if you want to change that, then we can get with Mike Farrell and we can bring that up to the policy committee and you can vote on including some exclusions or exceptions to that rule. That's all I had. Thank you.
I'm going to guess that somebody has a comment about this. Dr. Curry?
I just want to say thank you, Melanie, for clarifying that. I actually just had a case where that came up and I wanted to recommend against it and I didn't understand that it was part of our policies. So I would vote to have this issue brought back to policy committee to rethink through it. Thank you.
Dr. Small?
So first of all, I remember that retreat very well. And then folks may not remember this, but at the in-person retreat we had at that hotel in Olympia, I don't remember when it was, maybe a couple years ago, Morgan and I briefly brought up that issue and it seemed to not get any traction at that point. But I'll just throw out a suggestion, even though it sounds like you've developed an agenda already for the retreat in December, that maybe that could be an agenda item to discuss.
Again, talk about all kinds of things. Anybody else have a comment with regard to personal appearances? Well, I have one. I personally like personal appearances. I think that the first appearance ought to be in person. I think subsequent appearances can be done virtually. And I agree with Melanie that there are some mirrored STIDs that we put in place that may not require a personal appearance at all, but certainly virtual is an easy way to do it. But I think an in-person personal appearance really is very, very telling about where the respondent is, what their thought process is, their attitude, a whole raft of interpersonal, what do we call it, characteristics or reads of a respondent that don't come across virtually, but definitely come across in an in-person personal appearance. So we can certainly revise the policy, have input from everyone with regard to whether or not we want to have any at all, or one, or virtual, or in person, whatever. But that's my thought. Anyone else before we close out this item?
I would support. I would support an in-person appearance.
Okay. Other comments? Are there other additions to staff reports that aren't identified in the packet? Micah?
I just want to say thank you to the commission for heeding the repeated requests from myself and Becca King on the fiscal cutoff. We did get some last minute stragglers, but we were able to include the requests in. So as of July 1, and I know it hasn't been 90 days yet, but the 90-day cutoff rule is back into effect. We had to limit that because of the fiscal cutoff. So thank you for that, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Micah. Any other comments from staff? Okay, let's move on to Heather Carter. Heather, do you have words of wisdom for us?
I don't have any words of wisdom today. Thank you, though.
All right, well, thank you. You normally have very appropriate and timely comments, so next time. Any other comments, any other issues that anyone wants to bring up before we adjourn? Did I see your hand, Dr. Lyle? No, okay. All right, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the day. Meeting adjourned.